It's episode 153 of Grow Yourself Up. Welcome back. Delighted to be with you today. And today I want to talk about rage, about shame, about making space for our own inner baby in our parenting journeys, and about how we really have to learn to tend to our rage, make friends with it, get in touch with it, and really understand what it's trying to tell us. Because rage is actually a cover over for many things for many of us. And really trying to get underneath our own rage is very important in terms of healing and reparenting ourselves in the present moment. So I'll tell you a story, first of all, from my own life about sometimes when I experience rage and how if I focus just on the rage, I would miss the gold of my own story underneath. And I think this is a really, really common thing. So rage, it's often talked about as being maternal rage in like on social media and everything. So I'm talking here about rage that you might experience postpartum. Some people call it mum rage, maternal rage. It's rage and anger. And in my clinical experience, I think it's one of the most common things that happens in new mothers, particularly when we've experienced childhood trauma. And we are talking about it way more, which is really, really wonderful. And we have to not get lost at this top level of looking at the rage and trying to get the rage away, if that makes sense. So, yes, I've done some posts on social media recently, and someone wrote to me and said, but isn't it bad? What if we're raging at our children? Yes, absolutely. I'm not suggesting in any way that raging at your family or raging at your children or raging constantly at your partner is, should just kind of continue on. What I'm suggesting is that it's not helpful to be covered in shame about the rage and to try and kind of just become better regulated or something, or just sort of say, oh, I'm overstimulated, or I'm this, or I was trying to get things too perfect. That's why I had a rage, because perfectionism does drive rage. We really want to take the time to communicate with the rage and find out what's going on underneath, because it's often rage protects the sort of what is often called the softer emotions underneath. And in those emotions, we get so many clues to our own history. So this might not make sense until I tell you a story. Let me tell you a story. So in my family, when my children get sick, I experience a lot of rage and a lot of anxiety often, a lot of anxiety. When they are sick, I feel rage at my impotence, essentially my impotence and my inability to fix what is going on with them, to make them better, to take away the sickness, to just like heal them basically. And it's taken me many years to really, like when they used to get a cough when they were much younger, it would absolutely finish me off. I would be like checking them constantly for like, are they breathing at night? What's going on? And that sound of like a cough, I found so jarring. And so I would kind of toil endlessly and do quite a lot of overreacting, to be honest, about coughs and colds they had. And then sometimes I would get into a rage about like, why is the cough continuing? Why is this going on so long? And really unable to right-size my response to coughs and colds. And I've had to really spend time in my own therapy and kind of getting to my own process to figure out what happens for me. And I feel a lot of terror when they get sick, a lot of panic, and a lot of sadness, and a lot of grief actually comes up for me. And really, it's connected to my own childhood experiences. So I had a brother, when I was 3, I had a brother who died of cot death. So he died overnight, and he was dead the next morning. And I've subsequently learned, a friend of my mum's, who my mother's friend is still alive. She told me that he was coughing that night, and that maybe he had a little like some sort of little virus. And so I think that from a somatic perspective, and obviously this is not something that I can kind of absolutely clarify, but I think that I have some sort of body memories of how bad coughing can be, and kind of the outcome that can be really terrible. And so when this happens in my own house and the people who I love so deeply, my own little treasure twins, get sick, I have like a very, very visceral response. And I find it difficult to kind of just kind of right size it in the moment, and to kind of be like, okay, they're very healthy. This is a cough. A cough is, there's a function that's going on here. You know, if they've got a cough or a fever, if there's a fever, the immune system is trying its best to fight on their behalf. The cough is, trying to keep the airways clear. It doesn't mean something dreadful. It means they've got a virus. They've got RSV or a cough or a cold or something. And so I've had to be very tender with myself and very patient, and talk a lot about this with my husband, talk about it with my therapist, understand why I have these outsized responses, and really tend to myself. Now, I talked about making space for my own inner baby. So my inner baby, or my little inner 3-year-old, feels terror, absolute terror. I mentioned that I feel impotence, and so I feel rage at my inability and my impotence to fix it. And it's driven by this absolute fear and panic and terror that I have around what happened to my brother, and which was not dealt with, at the time that it happened when I was 3. So that's kind of remained in my body as these like trapped feeling states. And I really have to be very compassionate to myself and very gentle, and understand that I'm not raging about something specific in the moment. It's that I feel absolutely terrible fear about what could happen. And that, as I explain this to you, it might sound really irrational to you, but when we are kind of processing through trauma, this lives in my body. So this comes up for me in a very real sense, even though it doesn't seem to make sense from a cognitive perspective. And even though, like, all the rationality in the world, we could say, oh, well, they're fine, they're healthy and everything. But making space for my inner baby in my own mothering journey means that I then need to be very tender with that despair, very tender with that despair. That fear and that despair. Be with the profound grief of losing my brother when I was 3. Be with the profound grief of all the things that have happened in my family, of all the kind of the terror my parents must have felt, frankly. I mean, what a horror, what a horrific thing to lose a baby overnight. What a horrific thing to have a baby dying. And to make space for that, so that when I'm really crying or when I feel a lot of grief, I can be there for myself, reparenting myself. So making space for that inner baby is being very compassionate, tending to myself from my own functional adult. So not like sitting on the sofa and just mainlining chocolate or something and not getting dressed. I have to parent myself from my own functional adult, not from my wounded 3-year-old part. I have to get support. So I talk to my husband. I do get appropriate medical support for my children if necessary. I am extremely vigilant, and I'm also extremely, like, probably over-prepared in that I like to do all the things. I've got like a nebulizer. I've tried nebulizing all these different things. I've got lots of homeopathic stuff. I give them lots of vitamins, any like elderberry syrup that I can get hold of, anything like that. Like, yes, let's like strengthen our immune system. So it makes me very, it drives perfectionism in this area for me around trying to keep them healthy and well and safe. And it drives kind of very careful attention to this sort of thing. I'm not like a hands-off in this area, basically, because it's very much related to my own kind of trauma, my own story. But I need to make space for that in my own system, because this doesn't just go away. This needs to be metabolized in my system. At the moment, because of where I am in my own therapy journey and what type of therapy I'm doing at the moment, I am in a process of kind of biting off more of my own childhood experience. I talked about this with Geraldine Boyle a couple of episodes ago, I think 151, about really being in touch with those childhood things of terror, the fear, the profound sadness, the grief. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't listened to it yet. And these are these big emotions of terror and fear and sadness. Many of us have huge amounts of these suppressed from our childhood because of the high levels of emotional neglect that have been kind of mainstream parenting for decades. And so you might have something similar to this, and it might not be that you had a brother who died, but there's a lot of stuff that from a baby point of view, if you were left to cry, it's a very existential issue if from when you were tiny you've been left to cry by yourself. Think about a small baby, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, being left, if your parents were advised to leave you to cry, you would have felt profound despair. You wouldn't have been able to name it like that, but from what's kept in your body, and the fear of being alone. Imagine. And I mean, if I was left now, I'm 49, if I was left now to cry in a room and I knew that my husband was down the hall or like a friend or something, and I was left alone, unable to imagine if I couldn't go and open the door and go downstairs or something, I would feel profound fear and profound despair. In fact, I do feel fear often at night. And so we have to be so tender with ourselves in these areas. There's so much vulnerability that is trapped underneath what shows up, like harder things that show up. And part of a hugely important part of healing and in it, being able to reparent ourselves is to connect with all of that really those soft, delicate experiences we had, which left us with terror, with fear. And not to criticize ourselves for that, because it can be very discombobulating as an adult, especially if you're like highly competent and you're used to operating at a kind of a high level. And then you might be quite, it might really suit you to be cut off from your emotions, because we can operate more like a machine when we're cut off from our emotions. And so to be then confronted with these kind of massive engulfing emotions is really uncomfortable initially. And actually, you may yourself want to stay at the level of the rage because it's easier to be in that big energy of rage and anger than to confront what is underneath, to confront those terror states, the profound sadness. So I hope that makes sense. So what I want to say is that the rage is really a very, very common experience. But what often happens is that we get into these kind of, I talk about a thing called a rage fire. And I want you to all have a think about what contributes to your rage fire. So if we are perfectionists, perfectionism will contribute to our rage fire. That's a kind of a general one. The more good and quiet you learned you needed to be in childhood, that will also drive your rage fire, because that means you've had to suppress a lot. You've had to really be polished on the outside, and who knows what's going on the internal emotional experience. All of this requires suppression, repression, denial, and that will drive rage, because literally what's being kind of suppressed has to come out at some point. If we are neurodivergent, if we are highly sensitive, a lack of alone time can drive our rage fire. Overstimulation can drive our rage fire. Now, when I say overstimulation, it sounds so like, what's the word, sort of unremarkable, but I really want you to think about how motherhood is a whole new level of lack of control in terms of stimulation. Previously, before motherhood, many of us would have been able to control our level of stimulation by limiting contact with people, by limiting loud music, by limiting how much you go to the shopping centres, by limiting like whether you go clubbing or much like, or maybe you dulled that by drinking or taking drugs, so that then you could kind of be more in a club or something like that, because then your sensory experience would have been dulled a bit by alcohol or drugs. But and also things like questions. So that's one of the things that I find very overstimulating, is being constantly pummeled by questions. And when you're an adult, when you're at work, questions come in meetings, or they come in email, or they come on the phone, but you can limit that access largely. You can control access points. You can choose not to answer your phone. You know when meetings are going to happen. You can then go for a walk between meetings, but your colleagues don't run after you or tap you on the face or like constantly tap your body to ask you questions. This is making me laugh. Your colleagues don't kind of put their faces right into your face to ask you questions. Your colleagues don't constantly touch your body to ask you questions. But that's the nature of motherhood. And the younger your children, the more they'll be kind of unaware of body boundaries, and the more they may do that to you. And so there's this constant sensory input in motherhood, which can be, that alone drives, that can alone drive rage. And so sometimes that is just rage. It's not that there's something more underneath. But I was driving the other day with my kids, and they love to ask me a lot of questions. They were asking me like a lot of questions about, they've been watching a lot of baby videos of themselves, and then asking me about all the people that are in the baby videos, and how many times a week did we used to have play dates with them? And I'm like, oh my shattered nerves, how am I like? And sometimes I actually do go down the path of trying to answer these questions very precisely. And I was just like, I don't know. And anyway, they were both asking me questions, like some sort of version of this. And I was at a big roundabout, like a traffic roundabout. And I just lost it, because I was like, I'm trying to like have all these cars, like I'm trying to manage this roundabout where all these cars are coming in. I'm trying to figure out when is it my time to go. And you people in the backseat are like hammering me with questions. That was so random. And I shouted in like a rage, because I was like, just stop it. Stop asking me questions. So that contributes to my rage fire. Unacknowledged trauma will contribute to your rage fire. Stress, general stress, life stress. If you're financially stressed, if you are stressed in your relationship, if you're stressed in any of your family relationships, if you have concerns about how to pay bills, if you have concerns about your heating bills or your mortgage, all of that will contribute to driving rage. If you feel unappreciated in your relationship, if there's ongoing relational issues within the context of your adult love relationship, if you feel unappreciated, or they don't kind of honor you, or they don't help you, or they malign you, or they belittle you, or they question your reality, that will all drive rage. That will contribute to your rage fire. So think about what contributes to your rage fire. Unmet needs are a massive contributor to rage. Think about how your own kind of focusing outwards and tending to other people constantly may contribute to your own rage fire, because if you're not allowing your own needs and wants to feature at all, then that's going to drive rage for you. So all of these things are important, because we want to address all of those. So I'm not saying we don't want to address what contributes to our rage fire. I'm saying that we need to look at all of that and work to care for ourselves in all those spaces. And when we do have a rage, we need to understand more about what is actually going on for us. Okay, so we are much more likely to experience rage if you've had childhood trauma, if you have retained reflexes, especially the Moro and the retained Moro and the retained fear paralysis reflex, because Moro is your primitive fight and flight, and that makes us more reactive. So if you've got a retained Moro reflex, you will be more reactive. This is not a moral failing. This is something that's indicated that your Moro has failed to integrate. In terms of with the childhood trauma, we like a core part of childhood trauma is emotional neglect and the kind of trauma that happens in our attachment relationships. So what that means is that we haven't had enough co-regulation. So we won't have a wide window of tolerance. So more things will push us out of the zone in which we can comfortably operate. So we will experience more rage. And when we haven't had our emotions held and tended to, and we've had emotional neglect, we'll have more suppression, which will also drive more rage. So that's why, and there's actually other reasons as well, which I'm not going to go into now, about why we would be more wired to have rage with childhood trauma. Okay, so you can hear that your anger and your rage are really there to guide you about what is too much for you in your life. Like, where are the struggle points? So if I just take that example of the car, I need to be clear with my girls about what I can manage and what I cannot manage when we're driving in the car. And I can put down boundaries around, okay, you need to talk to each other. You need to stop asking me questions. I'm going to have a question break when we're at this section of the road. And I do have that with them on driving on highways. I'm like, okay, now it's a question break. And then I say, okay, you can ask me some questions now when I'm back to driving in roads that are like less overstimulating for me. And so these like being in touch with your rage and anger will give you guidelines about how you can tend to yourself better, where you might need help, and then really, really importantly, what needs to be tended to from your own childhood. It's also important to consider where you are in your own hormonal journey. So rage may appear more in perimenopause because of the way our hormones shift and change. So progesterone is a kind of a calming hormone, which normally peaks at around day 21. So just before you get your period, you have more progesterone coming on, which can help calm you. That starts to lessen in perimenopause, and estrogen also starts to lessen. So that means that estrogen helps kind of protect our, the way that I understand it, our sensory experience is less jarring when we are not declining in estrogen. And so it might be that in perimenopause, you've experienced more rage because you're being more, you're getting less of this hormonal buffer. So really have a think about that, about where you are in your kind of journey, how old you are, how old the age of your children is, because for some people, perimenopause and early postpartum clash. I've got a workshop, Rage, Triggers and Reparenting, which goes into all of this in a lot more detail. And it has a lot of journal prompts and a handbook that goes alongside with it as you explore the workshop. And there's also a Q&A afterwards where you get recorded questions and answers. And that's on sale on my website now. So if you want to kind of have some support, it's a pre-recorded workshop, and to work through some of your own rage story and get to understand it a bit more and learn how to support yourself a bit better, please go and have a look at my website, and the link will be in the show notes. So I want to say again, because it's such an important message, that rage does need to be dealt with. Because if you're constantly raging at your children and at your husband, if you like raging at your children or throwing things, that can be over time damaging if that's going on constantly and you're not having support to deal with it. And please try not get waylaid with covering yourself in shame and criticizing yourself constantly, because that diverts you. If you've raged at something or had a rage, or you've been feeling very ragey generally, and then you go into the cycle of berating yourself and shaming yourself, or you dissociate from it and block it out so you kind of don't acknowledge what's happening, you miss the goal from your own story. You miss understanding, oh, what on earth is going on with my rage fire? Why is my rage fire so like big at the moment? Like, how come it feels like it's become into a bonfire? Now, what has made it become a bonfire? You know, it might be that you previously had a lot of help. Maybe you had family who came over. Maybe your partner was at home a lot. Maybe you paid someone to help you, and then suddenly that help has been removed, and then your rage fire has become a rage bonfire. Of course, if help got taken away and now you had to cope a lot more by yourself and there was a lot more overstimulation, rage would be stimulated. So that's kind of going, oh, okay, so I need a bit more help here. I need some more breaks so I can kind of recalibrate myself. And I need to have some space and time alone. And I need to be able to go and do my own exercise to help me with my own window of tolerance. So if you then got caught in the cycle of, oh, I'm so terrible, oh, I shouldn't have rage, oh, I'm just such a bad mother, anything like that's not going to help you, because you're diverting yourself and you're just sitting in shame, basically. So then in that kind of dorsal place of being in a lot of shame, it's hard to then really actually take some action. So instead, I want you to kind of try and befriend your rage. I want you to be so gentle with yourself, as gentle as you can. And this may take some psychoeducation within your family, so with your partner. You may have to really get honest with your partner, whoever you co-parent with, about needing support. You're going to have to get really honest with yourself. But honestly, honesty with ourselves is a very, very beautiful thing. It's part of a massive road to freedom when you can start to be honest about your emotional experience and when you can really claim what you might need. So we really want to get to grips with that rage fire, understand what is contributing to our own personal rage fire. And then we want to understand, is there something bigger and deeper at play here? So what I told you about when my girls are sick, and there's something much bigger for me around terror and fear and despair about how helpless I am. Now, reality, I'm not helpless today, but I was absolutely helpless as a 3-year-old. And so there'll be huge levels of despair for me there, which I need to metabolize somehow. And we deal with these kind of trapped feeling states by being with them in the present moment as lovingly as we can, and just kind of biting off a bit and kind of metabolizing that now. I'm really kind of doing a lot of that in my own therapy, and I think that's help. I mean, it's definitely helping. It's me, I think saying I think it's helping. It is helping. So I want to read you something. This is because I'm following this on from the episode where we talked about that beautiful book, Healing Through the Dark Emotions, because Miriam Greenspan has some beautiful stuff to say about this. So she says, she's talking about her own book, and how, and talking about anger and these emotions, as a response to violation and injustice, anger is a fiery moral passion that impels us to act in the protection of one's life or integrity. It is an honorable emotion, so long as we don't use it as fuel for hatred and violence. Many of my references to anger in this book, however, explore anger as a byproduct of aborted grief, fear, or despair. When the latter, softer emotions are denied or suppressed, their energies are easily converted to and masked by the harder emotions of anger and rage. While anger has an important and largely overlooked place in the process of self-empowerment, it can also be a shield against one's vulnerability. Much of the anger we see in the world today is this latter kind, and it calls for a crash course in how to tolerate and befriend grief, fear, and despair. And so she's got a lot of beautiful, beautiful things to say about these in her book. So that was reading from The Wisdom of the Dark Emotions by Miriam Greenspan. And when we've had childhood trauma, we often have huge amounts of suppressed grief, which turns into depression, anxiety, or addiction. So there's that famous C.S. Lewis quote, which says, I don't know if it's rage or anger, but it basically is, I sat with my rage long enough until she told me her name was grief. And oh my word, whenever I say that, it always just makes me want to sob, because that is the case for so many of us. And I've said this before in this podcast, that so much of healing childhood trauma, and indeed alchemizing the pain from our lineage. So you're healing more than just your own childhood trauma. You're healing generations before you. And it's grief work. There is so much grief work to be done. So your rage is pointing towards that, towards the grief work of your own lineage, to what you might have been through, to what your parents might have been through, to what's being called to be healed. And your body is a vessel and a vehicle for that. And you can kind of really look on this as a very powerful role that you're in, even though it feels really painful sometimes and it can bring up so much shame. I really want to urge you not to get diverted into the shame and to focus on your rage fire and on the underlying deeper things that might be going on for you. Miriam Greenspan talks about how fear that's really being suppressed or numbed, can easily lead to irrational prejudice, toxic rage, and acts of violence. Overwhelming or unconscious despair often leads to severe psychic numbing or expresses itself through destructive acts to oneself and others. As we shall see, intolerable despair is also a core ingredient in the increasing incidence of chronic depression worldwide. The inability to tolerate grief, fear, and despair is a major feature of the epidemic of addictions to alcohol, drugs, technology, entertainment, work, sex that afflicts our civilization. So I really want to invite you, and this feels really important at Christmas because so we're coming up to this episode will be released, I think, on the 9th of December. So it's a couple of weeks till Christmas. There's lots of other holidays, religious holidays and other at this time of year. And it's a time of peak fantasy where, particularly for mothers and people who are trying to be magic makers and create all this sort of magic for their families, there's a peak fantasy of how we think we should be and then how the reality actually plays out. And rage is at a peak at this time of year because people, mothers, are driving themselves so hard with this idea of, I'm going to get things good, I'm going to get things perfect, it's going to be so nice, I'm going to be so calm. And so there's this kind of setup where on the one hand, you are imagining how you're going to get everything absolutely wonderfully, sort of beautiful and perfect. And then on the other hand, you've got limited resources, you're exhausted, you might be feeling really burned out. And there's this kind of expectation gap. And in here is where there's a lot of rage. And I really want to urge you to not set yourself up for more rage, to not expect yourself to be really perfect, to not expect yourself to be really good, to not expect yourself to be so calm, and to instead to really tend gently to your own inner baby, to what's coming up for you. You might have a lot of your own sort of body somatic memories triggered at this time because of what your Christmases were like as a child. You might have so much sadness coming up. I know that I find Christmas a very kind of mixed time of year where I often just feel very melancholy and a lot of sadness. And so these are things that need to be tended to in ourselves, to be really loving, to focus on having magic for ourselves, to focus on being with our own sadness, to crying. It might be a time when you do the most crying. And so I really kind of want to offer this to you as a self-loving thing, as part of emotional flow. So we always talk about emotional flow. We are wanting to connect to our emotions. No emotion is bad. So honor your rage. Look at what it's telling you. Look at your rage fire and really notice if big themes keep coming back. What is that trying to tell you? Okay, I'm sending you so much love. Make space for your own rage, make space for your own little inner baby, and tend as gently to yourself as you can. Bye.